Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are in the world, we want to welcome you to McMurdo Group's Search and Rescue webinar series. Our topic today is the real world of search and rescue. My name is Sherry Asensio from McMurdo Group, and I will be your moderator today. We are also joined by several great speakers. British adventurer Miss Sarah Uten joins us from the Alaskan wilderness. Mr. Greg Johnston, Senior Search and Rescue Officer of the Rescue Coordination Centre, New Zealand, is joining us from New Zealand. And adventurer and climbing guide Mr. Scott Blackford-Sheely is joining us today from Australia. We appreciate their commitment to be here today despite rather severe time differences, and I just want to take a moment to thank them up front for all the hard work they've each put into preparing for today's presentation. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to say that search and rescue is a very broad subject, and the information we are about to present today may vary by agency, country, and manufacturer. While we make reference to certain performance parameters, these are meant to be guidelines because every rescue situation is unique. I also want to remind everyone that today's webinar is the third of a series of events McMurdo Group has offered on search and rescue, and we have decided to extend the series. Our next event is on July 10th, and we'll cover ELTs and discuss aviation emergency beacons, and we hope you can join us for that. Our first two webinars included an overview of the COSPAS-SARSAT search and rescue ecosystem and MEOSAR, the next generation in search and rescue satellite systems. And both of those webinars are available in our website to play on demand at your convenience. And finally, a little bit of housekeeping. You will notice three gray buttons at the top left of your screen. The first is to ask a question. Simply click this box if you want to type a question, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible after the formal presentation. The second button is for attachments, and where you will find a copy of the slides for today, as well as links to some good resources. And finally, please rate the webinar at the end and give us your feedback so we can continue to deliver the best events possible. This is our agenda for today's presentation. We'll begin with a brief recap of the COSPAS-SARSAT ecosystem, and then Sarah Uten will share her rescue story of becoming stranded in the Pacific Ocean. Greg Johnston will walk us through a Rescue Coordination Center in more detail. We'll hear from Scott Blackford-Sheely regarding his rescue last year in Nepal, and we'll end with your questions. Okay. Now, we always like to start with a brief overview of COSPAS-SARSAT for those people who aren't familiar with it. It was started in the 1970s, and COSPAS-SARSAT is actually an acronym. The first part is a rough translation of Russian, which means Space System for the Search of Vessels in Distress, and the SARSAT stands for Search and Rescue Satellite-Aided Tracking. The goal of the system is to provide information to rescue authorities to simplify and take the search out of search and rescue. Unlike some search and rescue systems that require a subscription fee, COSPAS-SARSAT is free of charge as long as you have the proper emergency beacons, meaning a beacon that operates on the 406 megahertz frequency. Now, looking at the numbers, over 40 countries worldwide have adopted COSPAS-SARSAT as their search and rescue process. The satellite system monitors distress signals from beacons that operate on a specific frequency, as I mentioned, at 406 megahertz. In 1982, the first satellite was launched and the first save took place. And since then, nearly 35,000 lives have been saved with COSPAS-SARSAT, or 5 lives per day. By 2013, over 1.4 million emergency beacons were registered with COSPAS-SARSAT, and this number grows every year. This is the COSPAS-SARSAT ecosystem. There are 5 critical stages to the search and rescue process, and you can see them listed here. Stage 1 begins with an emergency beacon being triggered by someone who is in distress, and that can be either an EPIRB from Maritime, a personal locator beacon from an individual, or an ELT from an aircraft. And this sends a 406 megahertz signal out, and in the second stage, the COSPAS-SARSAT satellite system picks up that signal and transmits it back to a receiving station on Earth. And these are called local user terminals and are stage 3 of the process. From there, the signal is processed and relayed to a national mission control center. And finally, the alert and location information are sent to a regional rescue coordination center. Today we are focusing on stages 1 and 5, that's the distress call, and the rescue coordination by an RCC. As you know, we're going to discuss rescue stories today, and there are such a wide variety of distress situations. You can see a sample of some in the images here, across maritime, aviation, and land. But all rescues are built around 3 core components. The first is notification. If you found yourself in a distress situation, the first question would be, how do I let someone know that I'm in trouble? And this is the primary purpose of an emergency beacon, to send a signal with or without location information, to let someone know that a life or death circumstance is happening and someone needs help. The second component is location. How do we find you? What are the various ways that a location can be pinpointed in the smallest search area possible? Because the faster a specific location can be determined, the faster a rescue operation can be put into motion. And this might be done with GPS, satellites, software, and other tools. And finally, operation. What are the various assets, the people and equipment, the agencies, and the resources that can be utilized to resolve a distress situation in a way that is safe for everybody? And sometimes this gets complicated by weather conditions or geography or distance to a distress site or other factors. Now, for those of you who have a keen eye, there is a person in distress in the photo on the right. And this photo was given to us by Greg. You can see a woman nestled in a crevice in the middle of the photo, and she was rescued. To demonstrate how it all comes together in a successful rescue, we're going to hear today from 2 adventurers. First is Sarah Uten. Sarah is a British adventurer who was on an expedition to loop the world on her own power by rowing, biking, and kayaking. She just started the North American leg of her journey a couple weeks ago, and she is currently in the Alaskan wilderness. And she is not in a place today where she could be here with us live because she can't connect. But she was in a spot a couple weeks ago where she had connectivity. It was right after she started this leg, and I was able to record her story for the presentation today. You are going to hear a little rustling in the beginning as a big wind rips through her tent, but then it clears. So here's Sarah.
Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Uten and I'm a British adventurer. I'm currently on a mission to travel around the world using a rowing boat, a bike and a kayak. And I'm actually doing a pre-record of this session to be able to join you guys at McMurdo today whilst I'm a couple of days off from my kayaking expedition. We're on land in a small community up in the Aleutian Islands. So it kind of sits between the Bering Sea and the North Pacific. So the next slide shows a map and summary of my current mission, London to London via the world. It was something I dreamed up after rowing solo across the Indian Ocean in 2009, spending 4 months at sea rowing between Australia and Mauritius. And in that kind of mind-expanding moment, I decided that I wanted more. I wanted more adventures that would connect me with the planet, with nature, and hopefully enabled me to meet people as well. As you can imagine, there weren't too many people out in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So this journey is all about travelling by human power across land and sea, connecting up this journey across the world, and using satellite technology to share it with the world as well, raising money for charities and connecting in lives with schools and people around the world. I started off from Tower Bridge, London, on April the 1st, 2011, in a kayak. I kayaked down the River Thames, across the English Channel to France, before getting on my bike and cycling through Europe and Asia to the edge of Russia. I then kayaked and cycled down to Japan, before heading out across the North Pacific the following year. I'll tell you what happened in just a moment out there. Currently, I'm kayaking along the Aleutian chain in Alaska, and I've got about 18 months left of the journey. I'm just coming up to just over halfway around on my journey. So the next slide will tell you a little bit about Pacific 2012 and the trials that I had out at sea that year, and just how my McMurdo PLB really saved my life, in fact. So I was aiming to row my 7-meter rowing boat from Japan to Canada, a journey of about 4,500 nautical miles. I'd expect it to take me upwards of 5 or 6 months. And during that time, I would be essentially totally alone. My only connections back home would be via satellite or communications locally via VHF radio. And I must say, heading out on that expedition, or those expeditions where you're totally alone, it's a great sense of comfort and reassurance, I suppose, to know that I've got my EPIRB and PLB with me just in case something goes wrong. And that year something did go quite wrong. I was caught up in a tropical storm Mawar, which had been Typhoon Mawar before it reached me, and I spent 3 very frightening days inside the cabin of my rowing boat during this storm system. Unfortunately, my boat, Gulliver, didn't make it out the other side in quite the way I had hoped, and lots of damage was done to the boat, the most important of which was that the hatches were leaking in lots of water. Now, the problem with, I guess, water on any boat is it can get sinking, but specific to this ocean rowing boat, if too much water comes into the cabins and alters the righting capability, then in fact you won't turn over back in the event of capsize. We had about 20 rolls out there, and I was worried about what was happening, and with no ability to fix that damage myself at sea, and in that predicament, I decided to call back home and instigate a pickup, instigate a rescue. So that happened first of all via satellite phone, calling in to talk to my team, who talked to Falmouth Coast Guard, who advised me to activate my PLB, which I did. Unfortunately, by that point, my EPIRB, which had been stored outside on the deck of the boat, that had been ripped away, along with various other bits of kit. So the next slide just shows that kind of rescue chain. It was the PLB signal which was passed on and picked up by the Japan Coast Guard, and it was a Japan Coast Guard boat which travelled out the 600 miles or so from the Japan coast to come and pick me up. It took about 36 hours, which, as you can imagine, is a really frightening time for anybody, but it felt especially huge because I was very much alone out there. During that time, I was in contact with the Japan Coast Guard, both through the satellite phone, but also through VHF radio as they overflew me. They overflew me every hour to just keep tabs on my position. And the Falmouth Coast Guard likewise were in touch from time to time and in touch with my team at home. And I'd say that kind of support from the rescue services and keeping us up to date with what was going on and really trying to calm us as much as possible and give me advice on the boat was really great. That made a great difference for myself and my team at home who were helping with things too. I returned home from the Pacific at that point, unfortunately without my boat Gulliver. The satellite tracking device which had been on the boat, my yellow brick tracker, unfortunately had been removed by the Coast Guard, who thought I might like to keep it, not quite realising what it was. So I returned home, as you can imagine, rather sad on that point, but obviously very relieved and happy to be safe, and very grateful to those services, both the people that had helped out and also the services at PLB as well in playing such a crucial part in all of that. Now, the final slide there shows sort of the current status of the expedition. I did return to the Pacific in 2013. We managed to acquire, via stroke of serendipity, the sister boat to that first boat, and so we made changes to that boat based on our experiences the year before. And I went back out to Japan and rode this time from Japan to Alaska, in fact. After 4 months at sea, my intended destination of Canada was looking less and less likely to happen during the safe weather window, even though the conditions out there were as sort of rough and unpredictable and dynamic as they often are in the Pacific. I've made that progress up north to the Aleutian Islands, the small island of Adak, where I returned this year, 2014, to kayak along the island chain and up to the nearest road, because even having had that experience in 2012, I was determined to carry on and continue this journey, because even though, you know, crazy and not so great things happen from time to time, it's not to say that they'll happen every time. And I think some of the lessons that I've learned from this journey just include embracing those changes, but also being really sure to learn from them as well, learn from the things that don't go right. And certainly for me, it reinforced all of that safety kind of chain that you have in mind when you're preparing these big expeditions and hope you never have to use. But now, having had to use those, I guess it just makes the need for all of those things all the more real. And certainly when I'm giving advice to people who've perhaps asking about their first trip or expedition, where it's in remote places and they're far from support, I always am sure to say, you know, carry a PLB, or if you can, carry an EPUB and a PLB, just in case. You hope that you're never going to have to use them, but as someone who has had to use one, I can say that it's a great bit of kit and bit of reassurance to be heading out on expeditions with them.
I really want to thank Sarah and her team for making it possible to record her story. It took a lot of effort to coordinate, and they were all just wonderful. You can get updates on her expedition from her website, and I've put links up in the attachment tab to make it easy for you to get there. Both Sarah and Scott, who you will hear from a bit later, were both on, rather large expeditions attempting to do things that no one has ever done before when they got into a distress situation. But you don't have to be crossing the Pacific or climbing one of the tallest mountains to find yourself needing help. In fact, most people are out just hiking with their friends or hunting or out for the day on their boat when they find themselves in distress. And they don't generally understand how the agencies work that receive their distress alerts and then coordinate the rescue operations that come to their assistance. So now I'm going to turn things over to Greg from the Rescue Coordination Center in New Zealand to share some more information with us about that.
Thank you, Sherry, and hello to everyone from down here in New Zealand. It's after 3 a.m. here, so please excuse me if I sound a little bit tired. As mentioned already, the fifth stage in the beacon alerting ecosystem is a Rescue Coordination Centre, or RCC. RCCs are responsible for coordinating the actual rescue response. Globally, there are 244 RCCs and SAR points of contact, or SPOCs. Each RCC has a specific geographic area called a search and rescue region and are managed by a variety of agencies in different countries. In the US, they're managed by the Coast Guard and Air Force. In the UK, it's Her Majesty's Coast Guard and the Royal Air Force. Here in New Zealand, we're part of a government agency called Maritime New Zealand. All RCCs base our SOPs, or Standard Operating Procedures, on the IAMSAR manual, with some tweaking to suit the local environments. IAMSAR stands for International Maritime and Aeronautical Search and Rescue. This manual is based on theory derived from both the IMO, or International Maritime Organization, and ICAO, or International Civil Aeronautical Organization, who set the rules and regulations for international shipping and commercial aircraft. We also use this manual as the base for our training, and at RCCNZ we're all trained to an international standard and can independently assume the role of SMC, or Search Mission Coordinator, which means we can make tasking decisions without having to seek higher authority. Okay, so now let's talk more specifically about RCCNZ. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see the arrowhead shape that makes up our search and rescue region. Through various international treaties, we have accepted responsibility for coordinating search and rescue in our region. This is defined by agreed-to boundaries that relate to international flight information and navigational areas. At 30 million square kilometres, it's the third largest SRR in the world, with probably the largest oceanic area to look after. Compared to other parts of the world, there isn't a lot of traffic, especially in the southern and eastern reaches. So there aren't as many potential customers out there. But when someone does get into difficulty and requires help, this means there aren't a lot of vessels around to respond, and it's also a long way from any land-based assistance. An example of this was a yacht that was dismasted near our boundary with Chile. The nearest vessel that could assist was a supertanker that was diverted. It came out of Panama and was heading down to Cape Horn. It took 4 days to arrive on scene. Our area is quite unique and spanning from near the equator all the way down to the South Pole. So we have really different environments to consider. If you fall overboard in the tropics, your survival time could be days if the sharks aren't hungry. In Antarctica, you'd have minutes at the most. We're manned 24/7 by an experienced team of search and rescue officers, all trained to an international standard. There's usually only 2 of us on watch at one time, so we have to work collegially. So even though one person has ultimate responsibility as SMC, we discuss every incident and work together to achieve the best outcome for the casualty. Our primary objective is to task the appropriate resource without unnecessary delay. Around the world, countries have different RCC setups. In New Zealand, we are a JRCC, or Joint Rescue Coordination Centre, which means we have responsibility for both maritime and aviation SAR, as well as land-based SAR relating to personal locator beacons. PLBs are becoming an increasing part of our workload. In some countries, RCCs are managed by military agencies, such as the Air Force, Navy or Coast Guard. We are a civilian government agency, and as mentioned, we work collegially, so there's no structured chain of command in our ops room. In New Zealand, the police are responsible for what we call Category 1 search and rescue, which are typically local level incidents and close inshore maritime incidents, and we assist them as needed. Category 2 incidents are coordinated at a national level by us and involve searching for missing aircraft and vessels, and increasingly land-based beacon alerts as more people take PLBs into the backcountry. PLBs have really allowed hunters, trampers and people who work in isolated areas on their own, and importantly their families, to have some peace of mind that they can alert someone immediately if they get into difficulty and don't have to wait until someone reports them overdue. New Zealand has one of the highest uptakes of PLB registration and use per capita in the world, which is probably related to our diverse and rugged backcountry and rural areas, and of course our love of the outdoors and the recreational opportunities they offer. Now, our primary responsibility is coordinating SAR, but we also undertake several secondary support services. Search and rescue always takes priority, and we will drop everything else to resolve a SAR incident. In fact, I'm on duty right now, so if I disappear, you'll know what's happened. Amongst other things, we support the police during Cat 1 incidents by calculating search areas using drift modelling software, and we'll also do what we can to help locally run SAR operations and share our knowledge and experience. We can obtain medical advice for mariners at sea, and we're responsible for issuing coastal navigation warnings and making sure they're broadcast. We also liaise with other agencies to share our knowledge and provide leadership. Okay, so let's walk through how our RCC typically responds to an incident. Initial notification that someone is in distress and needs assistance can be received in many different ways. A telephone call, a radio distress message, a distress beacon alert, or even by email, or a request from the New Zealand Police. All incidents are unique, and they range from a clear-cut rescue with a known location, number of people and what their intentions were, to an incident with very little information, such as an overdue yacht. For every beacon alert, we react as though a person or people are in grave and imminent danger and require immediate assistance until we find out otherwise, even if this turns out to be an accidental activation. We never assume things, because anything may have occurred. A beacon may have been activated because the owner has come across someone else needing assistance, or even a car accident. Sometimes we're able to make tasking decisions quickly with the information at hand. Other times we need to gain further information, evaluate it, and plan the best way to respond. Now, some incidents are what we'd call snatch and grab and can be resolved within an hour or two. Others can run for days, weeks, or even months. With a search and rescue mission underway, RCCs will monitor progress, update plans, and make tasking decisions as new information comes to hand. It's always busiest during the initial stages of an incident, then tapers off a bit. But we can get spikes if new information comes into hand, or if appeals are made to the public for information. A search and rescue incident ends only when all persons in distress have been taken to a place of safety, and importantly, all searchers have returned to base safely. We take this responsibility very seriously. If unfortunately no survivors have been located, a search is only suspended after all search areas calculated have been searched to an acceptable level of confidence, and survivability for that particular environment has been exceeded. It's also our procedure to keep searching beyond that time and to notify the next of kin 24 hours before a search is officially suspended. So, as mentioned before, every incident is unique, and although we have standard operating procedures, it's really important to keep an open mind and consider all the new information that comes in. At RCC&Z, we're always striving to improve our operations and learn from previous incidents. All decisions we make are with the best interests of the casualty in mind. We think it's important to keep up with the new technologies that are rapidly being developed, particularly with the capture and analysis of data. These can help us in making good, timely decisions. We believe it's important to be open and share information, just like with this webinar, and have found that face-to-face liaison with other SAR practitioners is important in building trust and understanding. I believe communication is the most important factor in SAR, and when things go wrong in a search mission, invariably it's because of a breakdown in communication. So when it all comes together, people get rescued, and I can tell you without any doubt, distress beacons save lives. With that in mind, our next speaker, Scott Blackford-Sheely, is going to share his story of surviving a climbing accident last year in Nepal. Now, this story is of particular interest to us at RCC New Zealand because the emergency beacon used was registered with us. So we received the initial distress signal. Because the location was outside our search and rescue region, we didn't in fact coordinate the rescue response. We did, however, look up the emergency contacts and notify the expedition support team that a distress signal had been received and continued to support them throughout. They then called the climbing team via satellite phone to gather more information and set the rescue mission in process. But I'll let Scott tell you his own story. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Greg. Again, my name is Scott Blackford-Sheely. And thank you, Sherry and the McMurdo Group, for inviting me to be a part of your webinar. I'm going to share a story with you about my attempt last year to climb this mountain, Annadesha or White Wave. In 2012, my good friend and climbing partner Rob Frost was reading a book when he saw a photo of a mountain which read with a caption, "The Unclimbed Annadesha." This piqued Rob's curiosity. So being quite the literature buff and also really curious whether it had been climbed, he did a lot of research and found out, much to his surprise, that not only is it still unclimbed, but it had actually never received an attempt on it. So I just want to show you an overview of the mountain. Now this is taken from the northeast corner. It's an aerial view actually got off Google Earth. And the red line shows our approximate path on the Ramtang Glacier. And you'll see a few little words there as well. At the base of a gigantic space that's actually in the shadow, it says Camp 2. And then directly above it, about 800 meters, you can see Summit. Now these are all going to play into the story, which I'm going to get into now. So Rob got a team together of 4 people, and that was Rob Frost, Andre van de Schoten, Ben Dare, and myself. And the trip started on April 7th when the 4 of us departed from Christchurch International Airport in New Zealand, and 2 days later we were in Kathmandu, Nepal. From Kathmandu, we had a 2-day bus journey getting to the far northeast corner of the country. And once we were finished with that bus journey, then we had an 11-day trek, just getting to a valley which would then give us access towards the mountain. At this point, we still hadn't even seen the mountain that we were going to climb yet. After we had a few weeks of ferrying loads further up a glacier, then we finally got our first glimpse of the mountain. Now, in the screen here, you can see in the top right-hand corner, that's actually me walking across the Ramtang Neve, or upper part of the glacier, towards White Wave. You can very clearly see the summit, and just at the bottom of the summit, if you go down to where it starts to look a little bit more flat, then that's where our Camp 2 was. So the plan was for all of us to camp out at our Camp 2, and on the 2nd and 3rd of May, we were resting up and preparing for the first attempt. It was agreed that Ben and I would give the first attempt on the mountain, and Rob and Andre would go down to a lower altitude, actually back to our base camp at 4,800 meters. So the morning of May the 4th rolled around, and Ben and I got up really early, still in the dark, and we began to climb up a face. So we were intending to climb from the camp up a 500-meter face to gain a ridge, and from that point we would camp out for a night, and the next morning we would climb along the ridge to the summit. That was the plan, at least. Now, once we began ascending the 500-meter vertical face, we got to a point where we needed to actually start to use ropes. So we began climbing what's referred to as pitches, or an entire rope length. I was doing the leading for the climbing that day, and we ended up climbing 5 pitches, getting very, very close to the ridge. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we had a scheduled radio communication with Rob and Andre. So we get on the radio and converse, basically say that we're about 1 pitch away from the top of the ridge. It had started to snow in the afternoon, and that Ben wasn't feeling very good. So we put down the radios, and then I begin to climb. So I'm looking upwards, and I'm thinking, right, 1 more pitch, and then we can put up our tent, and we can camp out and rest for the rest of the day. The lower right-hand photo is me climbing upwards from that final belay. It's actually the final photo taken on our ascent during the trip. And this was the steepness of the climbing for about the first 15 meters. After those 15 meters, the angle changed just a little bit, and it allowed me to climb without the use of my hands, and instead just walk up using my feet and use my ice axes as canes for balance. Now, I continued like this for about 15 meters, and then I reached a point as the snow started to go from about ankle deep up to about knee deep. I thought this slope could go, or it could release an avalanche. I wanted to make sure that Ben would be in an objectively safer location where he was at his belay. So I look back over my right-hand shoulder, and I see that, indeed, Ben would be in a safe spot in the worst-case scenario that an avalanche would occur. So I put this out of my mind. I look up, and I see the ridge is very close. And anything at this altitude took a lot of energy. So I found that I could continue for quite a long time, actually, if I took 3 deep breaths and then 1 more step, and repeated the process all the way up. I continued like this for a few more meters, and then my next memories are lying on my back, looking upwards to a ceiling with lights on it, and I'm dressed in robes. So I didn't know where I was, I don't know how I got there, and I didn't know why I was there either. So this is back to the photo of the upper part of the Ramtang Glacier. So Camp 2 in the middle. You can see the red path leading up the face. And just before the ridge there, then it's labeled Scott's Fall. Now, going back to the actual incident, Ben was belaying me, and he noticed that some snow started to release and cascade above him. So he hunched over, held the rope tighter, and when he looked around after the snow had settled, he noticed that I wasn't actually above him anymore. In fact, I was below him, about 50 meters below him, hanging upside down and completely non-responsive. So at this point, Ben went into rescue mode. He lowered himself down to me. He double-checked me, did a survey of whether I had any serious bodily injury. And then, as it was approaching the end of the day, he proceeded to lower me 2 pitches, or those rope lengths, down to a spot that was suitable to set up a tent. That's what the upper photo is in this slide. So I was unable to do anything. I could barely stay awake. I couldn't stand very well. And then set up a tent, got my sleeping bag ready, and completely took care of me. Now the next morning when we woke up, he still had a big day ahead of him, and the rescue beacon still hadn't been activated at this point. So he proceeds to lower me about 5 rope lengths down the face, and then we got to a spot where we could actually walk down to Camp 2, or rather, in my case, I could stumble and then fall over. So Ben actually had to carry me through some areas and even drag me back to the campsite. Now, once we got back into our tent, then Ben decided he was in a good spot to activate the locator beacon. So he thought that this would be more appropriate because not only was it in a location that was already established, It was one that our other team members knew about, and it was also one where the rescue services could easily find us, and it's also a place where the helicopter could land nearby. Now, when we turned on the beacon, it was only a few minutes later that the Rescue Coordination Center in New Zealand picked up that signal and then, as Greg said, went through the list of contacts that we had registered with the beacon. The first person to receive a call was Graham Frost, or Rob's father. Graham obviously didn't know what had happened, so he phoned his daughter, Jo. Jo didn't know what happened either, and gave a satellite phone call to Rob. Rob didn't know what happened, and this really worried Rob and Andre that the beacon had been sent off. So Rob and Andre pack up their bags and climb, actually starting at about 6 p.m., through the night up 1,200 vertical meters just to get to Camp 2 and figure out whether Ben needed assistance in a rescue and just to figure out exactly what had happened. Now, in the background, Graham Frost continued to work. The other contact that we had left with Graham was actually Lisa Churgle, who is the honorary consul for New Zealand based in Kathmandu. She used her contacts and was instrumental in actually getting us a rescue helicopter. So she called a rescue company, and then other phone calls were made that were very important. So Graham contacted the general manager of the New Zealand Alpine Club, Sam Newton, and he also contacted the insurance company themselves and had words with the rescue services based in Kathmandu. So before long, a rescue helicopter was sent out from Kathmandu, and we had a pickup on the early morning of the 6th of May. So Ben and I got transported back to a hospital in Kathmandu where I spent 11 days in intensive care. I was finally given clearance to fly, and they let us go. So we traveled back home to New Zealand, where Ben returned to his job as a structural engineer, and to this day actually puts up daring new first ascents of mountains and routes in New Zealand, and where I returned as a guide and an ice climbing instructor, and I'm now currently living in Melbourne, Australia. Well, thank you for listening to my story. I hope you enjoyed the content and found some useful information. And just want to make sure as well, if you guys head off on your own adventures, to make sure that you not only carry some way to contact the outside world, especially a locator beacon, but also that you have a clear plan of what you're doing. And you talk about that plan with someone who knows where you're going. So let them know where you're going, how long you plan to be out, and what to do in case something happens. That way, if you're overdue, then they can start that chain in effect to make sure that you can get some help that you need. I'll pass it back to you, Sherry.
Thank you so much, Scott, for sharing your incredible story. Your accident and the subsequent rescue effort is a great example of so many best practices in search and rescue. As you said, things like having a 406 megahertz emergency beacon as well as other communications, having an emergency plan in place with good information on your beacon registration so that the RCC New Zealand guys could contact the right people immediately. And, of course, the many people who acted quickly and selflessly to get you off the mountain and to medical treatment. There are a lot of heroes in Scott's stories, especially Ben. And we're just glad you're okay and that you were able to speak with us today, so thanks again. This is a list of tips to maximize your chance of rescue in the event of a distress situation. You've heard today from Sarah and Scott that they followed most, if not all, of these guidelines. And granted, they are seasoned adventurers, but these are things that every person who's going to be out on the water or be out in the wilderness can and should do. And we actually have this information in a handout, and I will email a copy to everyone who registered for the webinar today. Just a quick reminder before we get to questions to sign up for our next webinar on July 10th about ELTs. and also to visit our new social sites on Twitter and Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And with that, let's get to questions. I want to just make a note that we will not be able to answer any questions related to ongoing search and rescue investigations. And also, if you have any questions for Sarah, even though she couldn't be here with us live, she is delighted to answer questions, so you can ask them via her website or email them to me, and I'll forward them on to her team. So let's start with a question for Scott. I know you mentioned this briefly, but if you could touch on it again of why Ben didn't activate the beacon right when the accident happened. Is that something he really thought about? Is I shouldn't activate it now, I should wait until I get down to a place where we can be rescued? Was he afraid that the beacon wouldn't be able to be tracked? Like, what were his thoughts about that? I know you were unconscious, but having talked to him, what can you share with us about that?
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. Now, I did actually talk to Ben about this, and when the accident happened, Ben was faced with a huge situation that he was going to have to figure out what to do with. And he could have set off the beacon, but what would have happened is we would have kept moving, and not knowing what exactly where he would be going, then that means that our location would change and could confuse any sort of search effort. But the other reason was that the altitude is actually quite high. At 6,500 meters, it's very difficult for the helicopter to actually hover or sustain flight in one location. And it would also make it very difficult for any sort of rescuers to get to us at that location. So Ben thought that the easiest thing to do would be to lower us down, more or less the way that we came up. And then if we were to get to the Camp 2, then it would mean we are in a high visibility location. And it's also a spot that our teammates knew about that would be an easy location to relay to the rescue services should that be required, and also one that the helicopters would have a very easy time landing nearby.
Okay, thank you. And Greg, do you have anything to add to that from your perspective about when the beacon should be activated?
Yeah, from Scott's description, those guys did everything right, really. I mean, there's no right and wrong time, but if you can make it easier for the people that are coming, if you can be mindful of the rescuers that are coming to help you, if you can make it easier for them, it does make a big difference. Worth noting is that all the 406 beacons do have, they send out a signal on a different frequency that is the international emergency frequency for aviation, and the rescue helicopters have direction finding equipment on board that they're often able, if they have their equipment on board, to track right into where that beacon is. So sometimes the position information can be corrupted by terrain, or the beacon might not see a satellite for long enough to fix a position, but they can get in there. But everything those guys did was pretty much textbook.
Okay, great. And this question is for you, Greg. Should emergency beacons have a way to transmit other information, such as if there is a medical issue? So, do you think beacons should be able to somehow transmit, like in Scott's case, that he was injured and needed medical assistance?
Yeah, I know there's a bit of debate going on internationally, and as technology sort of improves, there's the capacity to put this sort of stuff in beacons. At the moment, we treat every alert as if there's a person or people in grave and imminent danger and in need of immediate assistance until we find out otherwise. So, I mean, the system works pretty well. So I can see some benefit, but it also opens, if you're able to transmit that information, it's open up to some subjectivity. Some people out in the field will underestimate the danger they're in. Other people will overestimate the danger they're in. So with that extra information, there is a danger of overcomplicating things. And one of the sort of suggested additions to the beacon is pre-programmed sort of information. That opens up to the possibility of hitting the wrong button and people getting erroneous information. So yes, definitely, I think that those sorts of things can be considered, but shouldn't just rush into that. Just more information sometimes isn't the best thing. I know there is some talk for ELT, so those are the beacons that go on aircraft, being connected to the flight information systems on aircraft, and this would allow possibility of activating beacons without someone having to sort of hit the button or after a crash scenario. So there's pluses and minuses.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you, Greg, is do RCCs have their own equipment to rescue people? How does that work?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It varies across the world. We all sort of operate the same system and speak the same language, but in different countries we go about the way we conduct those rescues differently. Some countries, RCCs, have dedicated helicopters and rescue boats and fixed-wing aircraft under their control. In New Zealand, because of our size and sort of budget constraints and that sort of thing, we don't have a dedicated fleet under our command. We use a mixture of our armed forces, so our Navy and our Air Force. We, interestingly, for helicopter rescue, we use commercial operators that are normally set up as search and rescue trusts, and we actually pay them by the hour for the rescues that they conduct. We also utilise volunteer organisations, and that's a really big part of I guess the pointy end of rescue in New Zealand. Our Coast Guard service is a volunteer service, and also our land search and rescue service is all volunteers. So there's an awful lot of people putting in their own time and efforts to get out and rescue people. So there's a real big variety across the world.
Okay, thank you. Scott, this question is for you. Do you still mountain climb after your accident? And what do you think can be done to ensure that other adventurers use PLBs?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really good question. I actually definitely do climb. It's something that I will not give up in my life. And after the accident, I actually returned to be an ice climbing guide. It was actually only about a month and a half after my fall. So that was probably the best way for me to get used to daily life again. And I went to do a lot of climbing in New Zealand for the months following my time back at work after my fall. And over here, absolutely as well. So get out for a lot of rock climbing. And I have actually a few mountains that I'd really like to still get out and climb. Now, the second part of your question, if you think about going out in the mountains, seeing as how some dangerous things can happen, it is a good idea to bring some sort of a locator beacon along. So when I do go out on a big trip, I do bring a locator beacon, and I do encourage all of my friends to bring them out as well. And you'll be happy to know that Ben there goes climbing with a locator beacon as well now, especially after what happened last year. So yeah, just a good idea all around.
Have you ever had to use the beacon again? Have you ever or been involved in a circumstance with other climbers where you had to use the beacon again?
Yeah, so I personally haven't had to activate a beacon. However, I was in a situation in 2008, and I was actually in the mountains when a locator beacon got set off, even though I didn't know about it, and I helped to evacuate a group of climbers so we could notify on foot as well the rescue services in the town of Wanaka in New Zealand. And that actually was just a body recovery, so the person had already been killed in a climbing accident. So while time wasn't as important, there were still a few live people with the deceased climber's body. So it was still good that we we got help, particularly for the people that were still with the body. And I do have actually a few other people I know who in the mountains had some difficulties, and they needed to set off a beacon, and actually everything worked out fine for them. So yeah, still a very valuable piece of climbing equipment to bring along. Thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you, Scott. I think we have time for just one or two more. So Greg, this one just came in. While the importance of PLBs is certainly underlined in this webinar by both adventurers, I would like to ask if you think a PLB should be considered as a must-have equipment from fishing vessels worldwide, since there are various incidents being reported yearly. And so I'm assuming your answer to that is going to be absolutely yes, but can you elaborate a little bit more? We've talked a lot about having PLBs on for outdoor adventurers, and I know EPIRBs get talked about for being on a boat, but what about having PLBs on your person when you're on a boat?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, as far as fishing boats go, different countries have different regulations, and I know in a lot of countries, and certainly in New Zealand, all commercial boats are mandated to have an EPIRB on board. But yeah, I think we always promote having as many forms of communication with you as possible. So you know, if you're on a boat that thinks you could get separated from that boat and an EPIRB that might be connected to that, if you have your own EPIRB on you, that's going to enable you to be visible to the searchers. They can DF in on you. But I would also add that it's important to have some other forms of communication, such as a VHF radio or a cell phone in a waterproof bag. And you know, Scott's story sort of highlighted that you know, the beacon alone was great. We were alerted to something that was happened, but the rescue was a lot more effective because we were able to communicate with his team by sat phone and organise the rescue. So, yep, I think it's a great idea to have a PLB on your person as well, and consider those other forms of communication also.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm afraid we have run out of time. I know we didn't get to everyone's questions, so if there's something in particular you want us to speak to, please just email me, and I'll do my best to get the information back to you. I want to thank everyone again for your participation in this webinar. A huge thank you to our speakers, and we will be sending you a link to the recorded presentation, which can be viewed on demand, so please share that with your networks, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.